We have a fabulous lineup for you today. 5, we shall leap straight in. My first one up is For Thy Great Pain, Have Mercy on My Little Pain by Victoria MacKenzie. And this comes to us from Bloomsbury. Hello, darling. Are you listening to my book reviews? This is a debut, and MacKenzie has written an absolute little gem. And you know how I love these little gems. It's a two first-person narrators set in 1413 in Norwich. So it's a UK author, UK set. And it's one of the most deliciously simple in terms of its structure, deliciously simple novel, but there's quite a lot going on. So we're set back in medieval times, and the two main voices, if you like, are those of Julian of Norwich, who some of us may have heard of, and who was mystic, and Marjorie Kemp herself. A similar story, if you like, to Julian's. Now, in medieval times, where one of the things that MacKenzie is doing is she's also showing us what medieval England might be like and what it might be like for women. So Julian, grown up quite wealthy, educated. The pestilence has made her life a little bit complicated. Her relationship with her mother is a bit complicated. Everything is complicated, really. And she, when very ill, becomes very aware of, she becomes transported, if you like, into a dimension where she sort of talks to Jesus, and he gives her what we call the showings. A similar thing happens to Marjorie Kemp, who's sort of low social order, quite an independent woman. I found this very interesting, the way she looks at the medieval woman. She's quite independent, she's quite noisy, she's quite boastful. They're in sort of burgher level, if you like. They make, as in that they were tradespeople. And fascinatingly, even though she sort of gets hauled up, she similarly has these visions, or what they call showings, and seems to be sort of tolerated by society. She's a little bit outcast because she's obviously weird. And in those days, we're looking at these women who never really claim out loud that they're talking directly to Jesus, because this might have been sort of heretical, or it may have had them hauled up as witches. So you were either witch, or you were mad, or you were a mystic. Julian of Norwich works out that from her conversations, or her communing with Jesus, that she needs to become a recluse. So she becomes an anchoress. And then Marjorie Kemp doesn't obviously do this. And the point, if you like, to the novel is there is a point in time where these two women meet. Marjorie's fascinated by her own experience of Jesus and wants to find out, will anybody really believe her, or what solace can she get, and does she find it from Julian of Norwich? Two very important historical figures in that. Julian of Norwich was one of the first books written by a woman in English, and Marjorie Kemp, one of the first autobiographies. How about that? I found it absolutely gorgeous, simple and complex. Wonderful read. Next up, Dominic Smith's Return to Valeto, and this comes to us from Alan and Unwin. Another deceptive book. I greatly enjoyed it. So it has that sort of mellow, tourist honeyed feel of the romantic Italy, and kind of the eccentric, maybe disintegrating. We were in Umbria. Everything is a bit sort of, oh, look at the lovely ruins. We have this that feel of that everything on the surface is very lovely, but deceptively, or sort of cunningly underneath this, Dominic Smith is asking us to look at what's on the surface and what's actually hidden deep beneath. So our main protagonist, if you like, is Hugh. He's the nephew and grandson of this one family of the Serafinos, who are clinging to their I suppose they were like sort of, the squires of the village, really, with these 3 eccentric aunts. They're great fun. And the grandmother, who really only puts in an appearance when she's really needed, and she is in command of things. Hugh ostensibly has come back because they have said to him that the cottage where, when he comes to visit, where he stays, has been taken over by this Elisa Tomasi. And they have no idea what she's doing there, but she says it was a gift from the Serafino patriarch to her family that was gifted during the resistance. He was a resistance fighter. And this makes everybody look at history, look at what happened when Italy was fascist, what part the Italians, what sort of side did the Italians take, and how then is this viewed in the current time. So there has been something nasty in the woodshed, and that's what we're getting at. But at the same time, we're lulled into this feeling that of sort of romantic sort of sentimentality, if you like, about our attachment to the past, attachment to history, attachment to story, while unearthing, if you like, these kind of jagged pieces of history. Absolutely riveting read. Thoroughly enjoyed that one. Something lighter for this one, lighter but terribly perceptive. I very much enjoyed this one, though I read it in one sitting. The Wakes by Dianne Yarwood, and this comes to us from Hachette. A little bit different. Yarwood has brought together, well, it's one of the nicest friendships I've read in a long time. We have two women, Claire and Louisa, and they meet up when circumstances in life have meant that Louisa has moved close to Claire, and they have never met. They're not friends until now, at the point at which the novel opens. And Claire has sort of found out that her husband's really a little bit bored by their marriage. She's got two children, and he's kind of moving out of the picture. He pops in every now and then to annoy everybody. And then there's this Chris, who's an emergency doctor. And these three are kind of revolve around each other, but I found Chris very much the centre of this, because she's clever, Yarwood, in that she's brought everybody impossibly close together in a way, but it makes the story very workable and very readable, because you're very happy with this kind of small group of people, because we're also dealing with life and we're dealing with death. He's an emergency doctor, and both in the work that he does and in his personal sort of pool of personal acquaintances, there will be 4 deaths. So it's sort of like 4 funerals and a wedding, if you like. It's got that sort of rhythm to it, but it's a completely different feel. So these two women, Claire is sort of happily and gainfully employed doing therapeutic, reports for therapeutic goods, and Louisa's kind of wandering around lost, and they decide, someone says, why don't you do, it's one of these things that's always an absolute disaster at a wake, is no matter how lovely the ceremony has been, and there are some beautiful ceremonies in this book, the afters, the catering is usually a bit of a dead loss, and so they decide to take the plunge, do something a bit different, and that's what they're producing the food. There are 2 or 3 other little characters who wander around, because Chris had spent his early medical school years in London with a friend Paul, and there was this girl Beth, and both of them kind of hankered after her, and Beth, as it turns out, marries somebody else. And what we're trying to find out is how Chris will get through getting over that relationship, and what are the elements that help that along. And you kind of feel this tension between himself and Claire. So let's see what happens there. Very enjoyable. I literally sat down with it, and then when I got up, it was because I'd finished the book. It was that enjoyable. Next one up is Go as a River by Shelley Reid. And I think some of, I've had a lot of chatter about this one. American author, and it comes to us from Doubleday. They're touting this one as the next Where the Crawdads Sing. I'm not saying I can't see it myself, but it is different. There is a kind of there's a different sort of bleakness to this, but it's not really, there's nothing ever that makes you sort of clutch your pearls and say, I don't want to read on. It is an absolutely lush, enveloping read, and you will find it impossible to put it down, as I did. Again, it was a sort of, I did stop for a cup of tea, I think, for this one, because there was a lot of emotion. I think I've touched my mic, and David's going to get cross with me. Anyway, we are back in 1948 in America, and there is a young woman called Victoria Nash, who is the daughter of a peach farmer. The mother is dead. She has a rather unpleasant younger brother, Seth. There are other members of the family who are less important, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story. Suffice to say that one day, walking up Main Street, she meets a young man who has just got off the train, and in her innocence, she's not quite sure if he's Mexican, that she's fascinated by his different skin. And it turns out that he's Indian. And it also turns out that the town really doesn't want him being there at all, definitely not lodging with any of them. And he should not be consorting with her. And her own brother suspects and then finds out that this is true because there has been a lightning bolt of recognition or love between these two young people. I'm not going to tell you too much because it's really one of those ones you have to read. But we'll put it this way. All does not always go well. And there's a lot of emotion and a lot of sentiment and a lot of, oh my God, how are we all going to survive this? Which is thoroughly enjoyable and very well written. Probably exceptional about this book is that Reed writes nature writing, a little bit like Annie Dillard on steroids, I'd say. And I don't know if that's fair to either Reed or Annie Dillard, but she does plant her story into a landscape that is obviously central to it's a part, as much the landscape is as much a part of the narrative as what actually happens to the people who are in it. This young Indian is showing her how to live in her environment, how to listen to it, how to love it. And this is all kind of, if you like, foreshadowed. Their attitude is foreshadowed by the fact that we know at the start of the book that the valley they're living in is going to be flooded. So it's a little bit about the past, how the landscape is sort of, we look back favourably at the past as another country and how beautiful everything was. So I found that an interesting concept, how marginalised people were viewed then, and how we then reflect on how we do that now, and a little bit about preserving our agricultural as well as our environmental heritage. It's one of those ones that when someone says, should I read that book? I'm just going to say, yes, do. It's amazing. You'll love it. And the last one up, The Belle of the World by Gregory Day, and this comes to us from Transit Lounge. Now, I will be talking to Gregory later, so I'm not going to say too much. And in any case, it is nigh on impossible for me to find any of the words that can sort of net this book in any way, which really boils down to me saying you really just have to read it. And I think you really do have to read it. To give you an idea, because I cannot even begin to sort of break down all the elements that what Day is writing about. But I think I will keep it simple in that we're talking about a young woman, Sarah Hutchinson, we're in the early 1900s, who has left her, graduated from her school in England and via Europe is going to come back to Australia, where she was born and where her parents lived and where they separated and where she hadn't necessarily a great relationship with really either parent, because their abandon of her seems to have been total. But she's left in the care of Fernie, who is an eccentric, different, not marginalised, but very cultivated man who seems to spend a lot of time travelling in Europe, broadening his mind and having every sort of experience you can imagine. And she gets sort of brought into a universe that she has never dreamt of. We don't spend too much time. We spend there because we spend a lot of time. Maybe the seeds are planted for the opening of her mind, but she's left this rain-sodden, dreary English boarding school, and she comes to Australia, and exactly where, I'm afraid, my brain and my geography are going to fail me, but down near the Otway, sort of near Geelong, but probably in those days miles away from Geelong, hours away. Very early on, she's sort of depressed, gets a depression, and Fernie is still on the continent, and she is left in the care of and I love this. I really love the way Day does this. He leaves her in the care of Maisie, and he never explicitly tells us. We work it out as we go through who she is, where she comes from. We get this feeling that she's just part of the place. And this is, I think, what part of what Day is going into. So at this point, Sarah sort of begins to awaken out of kind of the stricture, the kind of a deadness, and becomes alive to the world. And the story, when Fernie gets back and she and he move to his property, there is a move in the town to have a town bell installed so that we can sort of measure out things. And this really is sort of the diving board, if you like, to leap into why do you want to bring the strictures of measure and false sound, so I don't really mean that, but impose the self into an environment of both sound and landscape. This is a monumental read. It's sort of very hard for me to find the words. I have said this because it's a tribute also to the natural landscape, to the beauty of the environment that we have in Australia. It's also reflections on colonialism. It's reflections on, can we also live in a way with nature and with other species, but by being aware of them, not just by saying we're people and we dominate all of this. But there's so much else going on. And the language, oh my God. I mean, Jay dives into thoughts on the noise of the noise and the singing, if you like, of the universe. It's highly musical, highly poetic, lots of little sort of rabbit holes that we whoosh in and out of. And it's a permanent, almost an overwhelming of the senses. It's a stunning read. That's my little lineup. Gregory Day, Shelley Reid, Dianne Yarwood, Dominic Smith, Victoria MacKenzie. And every single one of those is worth every minute of time you spend on them. I can't do better than that.